Everything we do here at James Project focuses on caring for vulnerable women and children because we believe that's the call that God has placed on every one of us as Christians.
So, welcome back to the James Project podcast. And today we are interviewing the current co-directors, Bryon and Tiffany Applegate. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Like, how long have you been married? How many children, grandchildren, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I'll let you go.
I'm married for 26 years. We have 6 children total and 4 grandkids total.
That's a lot.
I was making sure. I'm like, how many years have we been married?
That's funny. So, you obviously run a Christian ministry, but have you always been Christians?
No.
We have not. We actually didn't come to Christ until later in life.
Mhm.
I had kind of a rougher childhood. My mom and my dad were great, but I had some abuse similar to our kids when I was younger in my life, and really went through a pretty rough time as a teenager and got kicked out of my house and really struggled in a lot of different ways and struggled with nightmares, struggled with depression and suicide. And I mean, it was pretty rough. And I met Bryon my senior year of college, and his dad's a pastor. Bryon was not walking with the Lord either. And when we were dating, and it was actually, we weren't living for the Lord at all. And when we got married, I was pregnant and my dad died very suddenly. And my father-in-law and his wife are just absolutely amazing. And they had been really they just loved me. I knew enough because we'd gone to church when I was little. So I knew enough. I had enough Bible in me that I knew that Jesus was the Son of God. I knew that my life I wasn't living what I should. But then they came and they loved me and they ministered to me. And really it was their kindness and their love of God that drew me to the Lord. And when my dad passed away, I was 7 months pregnant. And I realized that I didn't know where his standing with God was. And when I looked at his life, there was nothing that screamed out, I'm living for the Lord. So not knowing where my dad went when he died just broke me. And I gave my life to the Lord about the time my daughter was born. My 25-year-old was born. And Bryon was not happy at all because he thought it was a bait and switch deal. It's like, that's not what I signed up for.
Mhm.
I couldn't get enough of the Word of God, and I couldn't get enough reading it. And he used to get mad and roll over in bed as I was reading my Bible. And I was going to church and I was taking Sierra with me. And then he would go with me sometimes. And a couple years later, he got saved as well. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
So, but we were both, we were in I was 23 when I got saved. How old were you?
I was 30, 31.
Mhm.
I grew up in a Christian background. My dad didn't start pastoring until I was early teens. And at the same time that he started is when I actually started, I turned my back and walked away. So that it was not his fault in any way, but just the timing of, there were some other reasons for that. But I did not want my wife taking all of our fun away. So I was very hesitant, but the Lord got me.
Mm. And isn't it funny that we think it's taken our fun away, isn't it? Like when that's really the opposite of what is happening. We just don't know it to begin with.
Yeah. And not understanding, you think you have all this freedom beforehand, but you don't understand how little freedom you have until you start walking with the Lord and you
Right.
start understanding his love for you and you start understanding it just changes everything.
Well,
And
it's the joy that only comes from him. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know that you're missing out until you receive it. And you're like, oh, wow, I lived all these years
Yeah.
without experiencing that.
Right. Right. Yeah, more people understood that, because I've explained that to my kids, like, people think the Bible is like this book of rules that just steals all your fun, but if you
Yeah.
follow them, like, it's just your life is so much better. You avoid so many pitfalls. You have so much less baggage, So there is a lot more freedom that comes. Just a different, like a different framework of freedom. You know what I mean? It's the freedom we really want.
And even just not understanding that it's not, you don't feel like you're following this set of rules.
Yeah.
You just recognize, once you figure out who God is, who Jesus is, and what he did for you, then just little by little, that transformation, the desires of your heart change. So it doesn't feel like you're following rules. It doesn't feel like you're giving things up.
Mhm.
What you want and what you enjoy changes. It's transformational, and the things that bring you joy no longer bring you shame.
Mhm.
And there's just a freedom and a peace in that you just want everybody to get.
Mm, mm. And you guys are doing that with lots of young kids and women down in Guatemala. But what was your first trip? When did you take your first trip to the James Project?
February 2006. It was the first missions trip we had ever been on, and it was transforming for sure.
Mm,
It absolutely changed everything. We were very involved in our church at that point, and we were there every time the doors were opened. We were volunteering in all kinds of areas. We were tithing. We were doing everything, checking all the boxes that you're supposed to check to be a Christian. But we'd never been on a mission trip, and we'd gone away for our anniversary, which is in November. It's November 1st. I know when it is, but we'd gone away in October, November.
mhm,
And the guy we met when we were there invited us to go to Guatemala with him in February. And we said yes. And we went down there with the same people, same thing a lot of people think when they're going on mission trips. I'm going to go be a blessing to
mhm,
these orphan children. We're going to go teach them about Jesus, teach them about God. But when we got down there, the people there had so much joy that I just didn't understand. They had an abundance to their life that even though they had nothing
yeah.
financially, most of them, there was a joy. I mean, and they taught me so much more about God than I had understood before. And it truly transformed everything for both of us.
Yeah.
We came back and we couldn't stop crying,
Mm,
and we couldn't get over it. And we went and talked to Joanne and Carol, and we're like, we're broken. We don't understand what's going on. And they're like, lots of people feel like that after their first mission trip. Why don't you just wait and see what God has? Which was wise, but we just kept crying and kept crying. And so we turned around and went right back in February or in June of that year. And because we're like, is this real? What is going on? And so we were there for the dedication of the Monas property. We got to be there for that, which was incredible to be a part of.
mhm,
And it was the same. It was the absolute same. We were broken and we loved it. And we talk about it being during that trip, God beautifully broke us during that process. And it was painful, but it's something you want for everyone because there's nothing better than what comes out on the other side. I mean, it's just again, I mean, it goes to that freedom. Once you lay down those things that just don't matter and you start focusing on the things that do, it just changes everything.
And going
mhm.
back to the joy, is it was the same. We started experiencing a joy that we didn't know existed, and we had the joy of Christ, but we didn't have the joy of living out His plan for us
Mhm.
until we went down.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful place to be able to do that, like with such a deep focus for the whole week. Do you know what I mean? Like here we can do that. My daughter and I deliver meals for the senior center one day a week, or, you go
Yeah.
to church, and then the rest of the week is filled with the other stuff. But when you go down there, it's such a deep opportunity to just be the hands and feet of Jesus with people all week long. And it's so,
And the presence of God has
mm,
always been so strong on that place. I mean, there is no doubt that God created that his heart was behind that. The model that they put together, that Joanne and Carol put together for this children's home, for everything. I mean, the presence of God is so strong. And when we went, that was, 2006, that you didn't have cell phones that had data plans on them when you went there. They were still, I remember they were still using dial-up internet that was very expensive in the office. So you'd hear the squeaking in the back room. I mean, it was just, so you were completely disconnected the
Very much
entire
so.
time you were down there. And it was amazing. It was a wonderful time to focus on the Lord and just hear from him what he had for us.
Mm, yeah. My mom went down in February of 2006. And there, again, you're right, no cell phones or anything, but for some reason she got a hold of a phone somewhere while she was down there and she called me and
Oh,
it was just this really interesting conversation because she came back a different woman. And but she was like, do you realize that the same moon I'm looking at is the same moon you see? Like she was just in such awe of, just the different world it is. But it was such a funny little, like, that's what stuck out to her at that moment, like the same moon I'm looking at, you're looking at it too. The world is so big. And it was
well,
neat.
it was in that February. So she went the same time we did. We stayed at Hotel Lopez,
Yes.
which is a
It's
complete, our teams now
Our
have
teams have no
no
idea.
idea what
I'm
it was like to
grateful.
stay. Yeah, and there was a chicken fighting, a cockfighting ring right next to the hotel. So we'd
Still
wake up,
there, by the way.
yeah, we'd wake up every morning, and we took our daughter, who was 7 at the time, with us. You'd wake up every day to these, developing roosters who don't know how to crow quite yet, and I mean bugs, and I mean it was a different experience than what our teams have now.
Yeah,
I
there's
know, so spoiled.
there's no
Yeah.
trap in the sink, so you smell the sewage coming
The
up through the
whole time.
pipes. The pillows were filled with packing peanuts. That's what it was an experience.
It was, and even the lights, it was like, I mean, it looked like it was, and I mean, it was the nicest hotel in town.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Was Most has grown a lot since then too.
that's how you know God is in it and he's there with you because you came back crying and wanting to go back to pillows stuffed with peanuts.
You walk the ledge of the balcony and look down into someone's bathroom, like they just had walls. So you're looking down, and they had the laminate house and a bathroom and a pig tied up right there. I mean, it was just a whole new world for us.
Yeah, yeah. And you just couldn't get enough of it.
Oh, yeah, every second of it.
Really testimony to God's presence there. So how many trips did you go down on as a team member before you started leading them yourself?
Just that one.
Okay. So you
We we went down in February on a team as part of a team member. We went down as individuals in June, and
Mhm.
then we went to our church and asked if we could start taking teams. I will tell you, the first team we took from our church, there
Mhm.
were the children's pastors were there too. So we were called the leaders, but they really,
They led all the
they
activities and
they're the
all
ones
that.
who, yeah, and they
We
kind of
just
trained
yeah.
us in how to do it. But that's how, and then after that, we were leading on our own from that point forward.
So how many teams did you lead before you packed up and moved?
Well, from
One to
2007 to 2013, I mean,
one
we
to
took
two
one to
teams a
two every
year.
year.
Mhm. It filled with different people each time or some repeats or
The repeats. We
Yeah.
started out with one team a year, and then the interest grew and grew and grew because it's just we couldn't stop talking about it.
yeah.
So we ended up taking more and more people, and it just kind of grew from there.
Well, we
Yeah.
ended up forming a nonprofit so we could take more
Right.
people on not have to go through the church, which
Right.
that nonprofit is now James Project International.
Yeah, that's really neat. How full
Yeah.
circle that is, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. So now you're obviously leading the ministry. How did that decision come about? Like how do you go from leading teams a couple times a year to selling everything you own and pack it up and move into a third world country?
Only God.
Mhm.
It's it's so funny because we talked to Joanne and Carol. We so desperately wanted to be a part of the project. And we had a couple years before, probably in 2010, maybe a little bit before that, we had a 15-year plan.
Mhm.
And in 15 years, Bryon would have not graduated. Bryon would have retired
Mhm.
from teaching. So he would have a full teacher's retirement. Our
Mhm.
house was going to be paid off.
Mhm.
And Aramy would graduate. Our littlest one would graduate from high school. So we thought if we get to 15 years, then if they let us come down, if they would just let us come down, then we'll dig
Paint.
holes, we'll
We'll do whatever.
paint, we'll fertilize crops, whatever, if they'll just let us be there in the presence of God and to be a part of it.
Mhm.
And then in 2012, Joanne and Carol had come, and was it Joanne and Carol or just Joanne?
It was both.
Both of them. We'd gone out to dinner, and we were actually with our board at the time, and Joanne and Carol, and they asked us, "What's it going to take to get you guys down there?" And we're like, "You've never invited us. We didn't
Right.
know that was an option."
Yeah.
And asked at that point if we would consider it, and our hearts leapt. I mean, we absolutely wanted to, but we needed to pray about it and make sure that's what God wanted. Also, and it's a big change, and it's a scary change
Mhm.
to sell everything and go down. I mean, even if you want to, it can be intimidating to walk away from everything, especially when you have kids at home and just letting go of everything. And I'm type A, and I like to plan, and
Mhm.
I still like to have control, but I feel like I've let go some of that control. But I used to be very, very controlling over everything. So we decided to pray about it. That was in spring. And we had 2 back-to-back teams that summer.
Mhm.
We're going down. We planned, he was leading the first week, and then Aramy was little. So we weren't taking her yet at that point because she has a lot of energy. Anybody who knows Aramy. And if you know Aramy at that age, if you could imagine her at 3 or 4, I mean, she was even harder she was even more feral at that point in her life. So he had 1 week, and then he was going to come home and stay with Aramy, and I was going to go after that. And he went down and he prayed about it, and he called me from down there and said, "I feel like I've heard from the Lord." And I was like, "What is it? Tell me if you," and he's like, "I feel like you need to pray and so that it's confirmed with you, so that I know, it's not just me."
I said, wait till you get here. Hopefully God will speak to you while you're here, just like he did me. And then we'll come back together and we'll share what he said.
And I was
It
mad.
was a good plan.
It was a good plan.
I bet you
I
weren't.
was less angry with him. I was like, just make the decision.
Right?
But so I went the next week and prayed, and he kind of confirmed. So we got back together and we said yes. And it was funny because we said yes, but Sierra, our daughter, was about to start high school, and she's always been very intellectual, and she was starting on the IB program, and she had these goals, and we've never homeschooled. We didn't know what we were doing. So we thought, yes, but we don't think we can do it before 4 years. She needs to graduate first because we can't get her off track. And Joanne and Carol, okay, we'll put it before the Lord, and that's what we'll do. And then we were there a year later.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
How did Sierra feel about that?
She was
She
furious.
wasn't happy.
She was furious.
Yeah.
She was just about 9 months. I
Mm.
mean, 9 months after we got there. So
Yeah.
it was probably in December of 2012. Bryon said, "I think we just need to start putting some things out and seeing what God has and see if he wants us to go forward."
Mhm.
So we did, and we had our first fundraiser in February of that month, or of 2013. We put our house up for sale in March. It's so funny. I mean, this story amazes me every time. So when we said we were going to go, and Sierra and Aramy, Sierra was mad, and Aramy, she was little. She didn't really understand. She was 5. But we said, "What's it going to take to get you to understand that this is what God has called us to do? What would it take to make you believe that?" And they said, "Well, if we can come home and stay in our house." And we're like, "How in the world are we going to do that? We have to sell it.
Mhm.
If we can have a Disney vacation and
Before
something
we go.
before we go." And then there was something else. And I'm like, "Are you out of your mind? we're about to go on the mission field. How in the world are we going to stay in our house? We can't keep it. And how are we going to go on a Disney vacation? That doesn't make any sense. And this was like 1 week. We put our house up for sale and right before spring break. And over spring break, we were driving to Florida. My sister lives in Fort Lauderdale, and she had just had my nephew, her second boy, who was born at like 26 weeks, 28 weeks, extremely premature. And she had a 1-year-old. So we were going down to help care for the 1-year-old so she could spend some time at the NICU with the baby without the stress of going back and forth. So the day before we left, we were putting our house up for sale. A friend bought our house and said, and when you come home, we just want you to stay with us when you're here so you can stay in your own home. And we're like, check. And
Right?
I get a message on Facebook from a girl that I had not talked to since high school. And really, we weren't friends in high school. We weren't enemies at all, but we weren't friends. We were acquaintances. And she said, God laid it on my heart to make a little magic for your family. I work at Disney and I'd like to gift your family a Disney vacation.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
I was like, we're driving through Orlando tomorrow. And so we ended up staying on the park and having, a full day, 1 full day there. I mean, it wasn't like a week long, but took care of everything. And we drove through. And so they got to have everything she had, like within a week, it was all checked off. So she was still not happy when we went down and punished us for a while, but it ended up that, I mean, she was very grateful for it. Says it was the best thing that could have happened.
That's so great. And she's had some time to reflect on it now. And
Yeah. When by the time she graduated and she was coming back for university, she said, Mom, I've watched a lot of my friends from high school get involved in things that, I mean, drinking, drugs, sex, going down a different path. She said, I've spent the last 3 years in Guatemala alone, and it's been lonely, but in a relationship with Christ, figuring out who I am in Him and strengthening that. She goes, and I wouldn't change that for anything. So when she went to college, she had such a strong foundation in that. And now she loves it. I mean, Guatemala still has a piece of her heart.
That's so good. But how crazy, because that was one of my questions. How did you know for sure that was God's plan? But I mean, that's a pretty specific way that he answered that. So that made it really easy.
Well, another thing is Bryon, when he was from the town we lived in, the first place we lived was like across the street from the town we lived in. And he was so funny because he would be like on the front porch, I just want to move home someday. And I'm like, it's right there. I mean, he loved his hometown. He did not want to leave that hometown. But when Guatemala came on the table, he was like, we're supposed to go. And he didn't, I mean, and I knew that had to be God.
That's got to help when you're taking such a big leap of faith to have all of those things line up for you and let you know that that is definitely his will. There's definitely some peace in that, even amongst the crazy of, moving and to a third world country and all of that.
Yeah.
So,
God cares about silly little details. You wonder, about bringing things to him. When we left, we just basically walked away from the house and there was an auction company that came in. So we'd sold the house and everything in it. We walked out like we still lived there. And they came in and auctioned everything in there. So we didn't have to pack up. We didn't have to do any of that stuff, that would have seemed very overwhelming to me.
yeah.
After we'd been there a year or two. One of the things that I just really regretted was my wedding dress.
Oh,
I didn't do anything with my wedding dress. And my dad had this beautiful antique desk that was from the Prohibition era. So it's got these secret compartments and it was really cool. And my dad, passed away when I was pregnant. And I was like, I just wish I would have held on to those things, but I didn't. And a friend from our hometown came down and she was there for the auction. She goes, and I told her, I said, I wish I would have held on to this. She goes, no, Tiffany, I kept those for you. They're in the storage area. So she kept those two things she had. So I have my wedding dress and my dad's desk.
Oh,
Yeah.
God does care about all of the little details,
You
doesn't
don't even know that matter. He's
Right.
ahead and taken care of. It's incredible.
Yeah, so cool. So neat. So, in those early days of living down there, even though you had all this piece about going, what were some of the challenges that some of the worst challenges? I'm sure there were.
Language for sure. That's still a challenge for me. Not so much
Mhm.
for Tiffany, but for me. Um, just a change in the culture, having to learn how to shop at the market.
Mhm.
How to
Or
get,
the grocery store.
oh,
Everything is
this is
different.
different.
Yeah.
The heat. It took me. I don't know that I ever really got used to the heat. So having air conditioning is a big deal.
Mhm.
The hardest thing for me probably was you go from being an independent adult, knowing how to run your household, run a business, do different things, to not knowing how to do anything. We didn't know how to rent a house. We didn't know
Mm,
how to clean our house. We didn't know how to cook because the things on the shelves are different. We didn't know how to pay bills. We didn't know how to do any of that. And when you're so fully 100% dependent on someone else and the money, I've talked with some teams that come down, the money is different with the exchange rate. It's kind of like monopoly money. You don't really know what this means. You want that, So, I mean, learning those things was and becoming an adult again,
mm,
like super speed was tough.
yeah. Yeah. You had people in positions that were helping you, fortunately, right? Like, um,
We did.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The staff is amazing, has always been amazing and done a good job of wrapping around us.
Mhm.
Probably wrapped around us even more than they did wrap around us even more than I realized because because we're directors, they really take amazing care of everyone. But
Mhm.
they've just always done things for us that I didn't even know they had to be done, but they were always doing it. And then, like, the Wilsons, they're paying something and we're like, "What's that?" But our
Right.
staff always, "I didn't know you had to do that. That's just always magically happened." So,
Oh, and so you saw God working in those areas, obviously. And what are some of the challenges that we wouldn't think of? I mean, I think most people, if you think about moving to a foreign country or especially a third world country, some of those things might come to mind that you'd struggle with. But are there any that we just wouldn't think of that you dealt with?
Just even walking down the street and
Mm,
everybody looking at you,
mm,
and having 3 blonde girls to protect. I was always on alert
mm,
because I knew they were getting more looks than I was, obviously, and so just that being on high alert and it could be tense at times.
mhm. Because you lived in town when you were down there.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Right. With the little girls, it's interesting, and it made me very aware when we go down as teams and, when we first go down there taking pictures, when we're out at the VBS taking pictures of different things. And once we moved down there, people were always trying to take pictures of my girls.
Mm,
And I didn't realize how creepy it was until I was on the other end of that. And
right.
we went to, our school is an award-winning school in a lot of areas, and one of them is the Gimnasio. They compete nationally and won national titles. We're in the capital, and we have both our girls there. And there was like lines of people coming up to see if they could get their picture taken of our girls or with our girls. And they're like, and it really, you don't think about that. And with Aramy being little, they'd reach out and they'd touch her. And I
Mhm.
just, you don't, it really brought things into a different perspective for us.
Yeah. Because how old were your girls when you went down?
6 and 15.
6 and 15. Yeah. Yeah, that is challenging. So,
Yeah.
I know when we talked before, you had mentioned just leaving friends and having hobbies and things was hard when you got down there. Just that world of your social life basically was challenging. Did you find that? Was that something that you struggled with?
It was somewhat. Honestly, we've always been kind of a family. We've always we've been best friends forever.
Mhm.
So we didn't have, we weren't really social a lot of the times. We're probably more social now than we used to be, because once it was completely taken away, we really missed it. So since we've come back to the States, we've probably become more social. Going down there, there are things, and I don't know if it would just, as directors going out, there were people we like a lot of questions about, can we have jobs? Can we have, so we tended to pull back down there, which made it a little more lonely. But our staff is amazing. But you do, when you're down there, at least we did, especially with our kids, teams were so life-giving for us. When they would come down and you'd have someone who had kind of the same sense of humor, had laughed at the same jokes,
Spoke English.
So you didn't have to process all of that. The first year, it's funny, every missionary I've ever seen go down there, you nap throughout the first year, because it's like a toddler when they're learning the language and they need to nap. It's the same thing for adults. You're exhausted processing the other language the whole time. But it was, there were struggles and some loneliness being down there. I think the harder part of it was seeing family, with social media being what it is, you're seeing so many things that you're missing out on, or seeing your kids miss out on things. But knowing at the same time that God's plan is way better. And I know that what the life they had down there was amazing. And the people that are there are, some of the best friends that we've had. So it's overall, I think it was great.
Yeah. As far as giving up hobbies, it was very, very boring living in Mona.
Yeah.
It was, very rural, and there's not much to do there. We watched so many movies that I can't hardly sit through a movie now, because I'm done. I've done so many of them. I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned homeschooling too. You hadn't homeschooled before, so that must have been a brand new adventure and challenge itself.
Fortunately, Sierra did an online high school, and she didn't need us for anything. She was self-motivated. Jeremy, when we moved down after her kindergarten year, we homeschooled first grade through sixth grade. Then we moved back here, but that was interesting. And Jeremy's not self-motivated. He's a challenging student.
Not
very
academically.
Smart, very bright.
Very smart, but does not like to sit for those things.
Yeah. And when we have, we're trying to homeschool her in our office, and you have teams coming through, inviting her for ice cream, inviting her for coffee, inviting her for activities. I mean, she is highly motivated to participate in those things.
Yeah.
And she's extremely social, always has been. So it was always trying to keep her focused on that schoolwork could be challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of friends, there was a family, the Wilson family was down there for the first few years that I was going down to visit and doing ministry with you guys, and they had their children there as well. So, it was just always fun to see you guys banter and interact, because it was clear that you loved each other and you really enjoyed doing life together. Was that helpful to have another family of North Americans?
It was.
Definitely.
It was wonderful. We love the Wilsons. They are a great family. They're funny. They brought a lot of light and support. They were amazing. During one of the darkest times of our lives, they wrapped around us in such an incredible way and took us to a place of healing and really just stood by us. They've become some of our best friends and always will be. They are amazing people.
Yeah, there were other missionaries that were down there when we were there, and great people. But we just didn't click with most of them like we did the Wilsons. I think it's probably because we had kids the same age. We're in this kind of the same stage of life as they were.
Right. Yeah. And they were down there for how long while you were there?
They were actually there before us, but
They
not
got
with the
there
James
shortly
Project.
after us.
Okay. They were in a neighboring town. They weren't a part of James Project. We just happened to them.
Our daughters went to school together. Our daughter Jackie was going to school in Jalapa, and they lived in Jalapa, and one of their foster daughters was going to school there. So that's how we met. But they were there, I mean,
I don't really
just about
remember
as
their
long
timeline.
as I don't remember when they just seemed to be part of our Guatemala story almost from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So nice to have that, like how God prepared that in advance, because I hopefully will get a chance to talk to them too. And I know their story starts so different, and they got to the James Project for so many different reasons. And it's neat when you see those things come together for, for you guys to support each other during that stay. So, yeah.
Amazing. What an amazing family.
Yeah. So now you've moved back to the States. You're still directors, but you've moved back, and it's been really helpful for a lot of things for your family. Aramy is going to high school. It's much easier to do that, and for her here. And your mom, you're able to take care of your mom. But how long did you live in Guatemala? I don't remember the number of years you lived there full time.
Bryon and Aramy moved back in June of 2019,
So almost
6
exactly
years.
6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back in 2020.
Yeah.
So I was there full time for almost 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, did any of these challenges that we're talking about, did they ever just become normal life, or was it always just, they were just always, some of them always just there?
It became
You
normal
just get
life.
used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it
Good.
didn't seem, and the reality is no matter where you live, there's challenges.
Yep.
One way or the other. So it was the blessing of living there far outweighed the challenges of living there. In
Yeah.
my,
That's good.
and yeah.
That's good. That's good to be able to look at that and see. So, but so now that you're back in the States, it presents different challenges, right? Like you said, there's challenges everywhere. And you primarily, Tiffany, go down a lot for extended periods of time to stay and do work down there. And that must be challenging to have to separate, number one, being a married couple, but also, knowing the Aramis in school and need support, and how do you navigate that? Must be challenging.
It's tough. We're still figuring that out.
Mhm.
This many years in, we're 4 years in now, and
Mhm.
still trying to figure out how to navigate that. It is, it's difficult. It is the reality. We're not trying to wish away our life, but in a year and a half, when Aramy graduates, things could be way easier. But then at the same time, my mom is living with us
Mhm.
and elderly, so we still may not be able to travel together, depending on how her health is at the time. So we just kind of trust in God and play it trip to trip, honestly, to see how it's going to go. And we talk about what she's got to get done and try to monitor, with Aramy, try to monitor and make sure she stays up on things.
Mhm.
When Bryon can go, when he's needed to go, he goes with me on trips, on vision trips, different things like that. But for the extended trips, really, I end up going down there by myself. And then in summer, we have the
Summer,
flexibility. Aramy can go too,
Right?
as long as my mom is, healthier. Once my mom, something happens with my mom, that might change a little bit. We'll have to figure that out. It's one of those seasons in life for a lot of us where you're in the middle. You're taking care of your parents and you still have kids at home and trying to play that balancing act. But, we feel very honored. We feel like it's a biblical responsibility.
Mhm.
It's our biblical calling to care for our parents,
Yep.
and we want to honor them and love them well. So we
Mhm.
trust God will get us through it one way or another.
I'm sure he will. And are there, when you're in a particularly challenging time, are there Bible stories or verses or particular people that he brings across your path to help you through that?
We have an incredible board right now,
Yeah.
and that is very encouraging, very supportive, and very helpful in that capacity. That has been honestly having leadership, and we have 3 boards actually. We have Canadian board, US board, and Guatemalan board. And there's key people on each of those boards that really speak life into us. I think. And then for
Yeah,
me
amazing.
personally, one of my life verses always has been, probably to the point of fault at some point, is, I mean, I believe it, the Bible says, lay down your life, pick up your cross and follow me. There was
Mhm.
no promise of easiness.
No.
There's no promise that everything's going to go smoothly. We're going to go through difficult seasons, but he gave his life for me, and I feel like it's my honor to, as much as I can, lay down my life and pick up my cross and follow him in whatever that may look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
I mean, yeah, family helps. My parents have a lot of wisdom and understanding. Being pastors, they get this missionary life and pastor life are similar. We have a lot of pastor friends too that are encouraging. Yeah, I mean the word. I can't say there's one specific verse that encourages me in all this, but just the word itself. I mean, it can open up anywhere and feel like, yes, that's what I needed to hear today.
Yeah.
Or I can always go to it and find what I need to hear.
Mhm.
Without a doubt.
That's good.
You gave me a devotion at one point, Jesus Calling, for
Oh, yeah.
mothers.
Mhm.
And and there's the other Jesus
Yep.
Calling as well,
Yep.
devotional. Well, that was written by a missionary
Mhm.
who was going through tough times, and it has been very encouraging on a regular basis as well, because as you read it, sometimes when you're in ministry,
Mhm.
and we had just recently gone to a retreat and it talked about this, your identity becomes so much in your work that you're focused on that rather than your identity on Christ. And you don't mean to, but that's where it goes.
Yeah.
And that Jesus Calling is that constant reminder of God. What he's calling you to is relationship. And the service flows out of that relationship, but it's that relationship and his love for you and your love for him. That's the key part. So that has continued to speak encouragement into me as well.
Good. That's good. And it's so true because it's not even about, yes, he's thrilled that you're running this ministry and helping all these women and children, but he'd love you the same if you weren't. It's not that, and that's, he cares so much more about our hearts than what it is that we're doing, and I think it's easy for us to get lost in that. And even if you're not in ministry, I remember I didn't plan on homeschooling in any way, shape, or form when I had kids. And so when we decided to, it was a weird reason we decided to, but um, I knew enough about myself to know that at that time I was like, people would say, "How long are you going to do it?" And I'd say, "I have no idea." Because if I put a deadline on it, then I'm going to stick to that deadline, whether it's working or not. So I had to try to really force myself in that season to not allow that to become my identity. So many things in the past had so many jobs, so many, just even a nursing mom. When I almost couldn't nurse Zori, and I'd been nursing for like 3 years at the time because I nursed Brayden until I was pregnant with her. That threw me off. Like, what am I if I'm not a nursing mom? And I was like, oh goodness, that can't be who I am, and homeschooling couldn't be who I was. I had to be something other than that because that wasn't going to last forever. And I
Right.
would tank it pretty quickly if that was my identity, So I know what you're saying with that.
It's
But
good
it's
to
hard.
have reminders because
Mhm.
it's hard. It is very easy to create your identity in something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in what we do, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, And so, one of the things that there have been some other positives about you being back in the States, right? Like for the ministry itself and being able to grow the ministry. Um, you get to have more face to face meetings with people that might donate and things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we were planning on coming back. We kind of prayed about God. We'd be willing to go here, here, here. Obviously, if you want us to go somewhere else, you got to open that door. Wherever it is, please open the door. He did. We're here in the Kansas City area, And since moving here, he has opened so many doors. And he's still doing it. I mean, we just found out yesterday that yet another church is interested in wanting to send their pastors on a vision trip. So it's just been incredible. And just to kind of explain a little bit, trying to fundraise while you're living in Guatemala is very difficult. I mean, you can't go visit and have those coffees, those face-to-face times with potential donors and churches. And so being here is made the world a difference.
It has. And before we moved back, I mean, Bryon especially, I mean, I feel like he's very sensitive to what the Lord is saying and how the Lord is directing. And I feel like that's something, I think that's a gift he has. And he had it with opening Casa Maria and the pregnancy home. He's had it in a couple different areas. And he began talking before we came back, before there was any hint of us coming back, that I feel like sometime in the future, we need to be based out of the States and coming down here. The ministry, God is growing the ministry, expanding the ministry. And I feel like that shift is going to happen at some point. And, and I was in agreement with it, but that is definitely, I mean, as we started going down that road, the timeline, much like our 15-year timeline, the timeline happened much faster than we expected. And when we got here, when we shifted back, I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly happy because I really liked it. I like living down there. I liked being there. And I thought, "Ugh, what do we do? Are we screwed up? Have we, what have we done?" But I mean, it's very obvious that this is definitely what God has intended, because he has blessed it and he has opened a lot of doors to further his kingdom. And we're very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen just so many incredible things, just even in the last year, right? I mean, so much growth. And that was one of the things that Mama Carol mentioned when I interviewed her. Was one of the things she loves most about you is your vision for the growth, for new ideas of how to rescue and save these kids and minister to these children and women. And so you've been able to implement a lot of those up to this point, right? Like, what are some of the things that weren't there prior to you being there that you were able to implement or expand on that were there?
We didn't have our Casa Maria. We didn't have the pregnancy home.
Mhm.
That was one thing that wasn't there. We were able to, a lot of the sustainability, self-sustainability, all of that, we've been able to implement. The transition program, they had Casa Maria, but like the work program that we have now,
Casa Magdalena,
Casa Magdalena, what did I say? I'm sorry.
Maria.
Casa Magdalena, but the work program where they're working and developing those skills to begin with so that they can launch into real jobs. And some of that training, we've started training some of them how to drive, how to ride the busing system. So some of those more life skills. We've also implemented the trade school,
Mhm.
where the trade school classes that are happening, and the family care program, where
Yeah.
we're going out and ministering to the family.
Mhm.
We redid the Redeemed program, or we launched it's the Redeemed program now, the Widows program. Before, they were weaving,
Mhm.
but we were looking for a way to launch more women actually into independence
Right.
and try to help them. So we revamped the Redeemed program. And then with the family care program, where we're wrapping around the families as they go back to continue having support and try to get those families healthy, has been a big thing. And then the United in Christ, where we're trying to raise up the Big C church to wrap around vulnerable families to stop the inflow of kids into the system. Because we feel like if the Church of Christ, not the denomination, but like the
Sure.
body of Christ, would step in that gap, and before kids were exploited, before families were exploited, because sometimes it's as simple as helping them pay a bill or making sure somebody can go to work and the kid's not being exploited while they're gone. I mean, it can be little things that could change the trajectory of an entire family and change. And that's what we're called to do, not just us as missionaries, but the church, the Big C church around the world. So United in Christ is really focused on raising the local church up to do that. And we believe through that, more people, more families are going to come to the Lord. And so the kingdom of God is going to grow through that process.
Yeah, which is amazing. And you've brought pastors in the area together to meet on the property, right? Like that's what you're working to do.
Every month we get together and have a fasting and prayer time with local pastors.
And that was a challenge to get going, right? Because there wasn't a great system of community for the churches there.
Historically, there was a lot of competition between the churches and a lot of walls up. And it's been so encouraging to see them working together for the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
In August was the day of the Bible, and churches from multiple denominations came together, and they started at the four corners of the town. I think there were over 20 churches involved, praying, walking, marching through the streets, praying for Monjas. They came together in the center of the town and put together a service. I mean, and one church provided the chairs, another one did the stage. And it wasn't one denomination, it was multiple denominations, all just looking towards the kingdom of God and how do we advance the gospel and bring this light into the darkness. And it was just incredible to see.
That is incredible. I wish I could have been there because that's such an encouraging thing. Because we have the same thing here in the States where churches, because they don't believe exactly the same theology, they won't interact as much. And it's too bad because the gospel is the message. It's not any one church's theology necessarily that should be pushing. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. So she also mentioned you have lots of ideas that you still want to implement, right? But I was wondering something as I was thinking about this and having interviewed Joanne and Carol, they both talked about how when they showed up in Guatemala, they didn't have big dreams for developing a children's home and even when the idea came to Carol, she was like, yeah, that maybe sometime in the future, or maybe, they didn't have big aspirations to establish a ministry. They were just taking the next step each time. Do you know what I mean? And now looking back, that's what happened. But they were just taking the next step. And I got thinking about it with it. It reminds me of my own homeschooling. Like I didn't plan on homeschooling. And when I started, I didn't have aspirations to do what we did. It looked very different by the time we got to the end than what I was planning on doing, and I wondered if you have had the same experience where when you got down there, you were just did you have all of these aspirations to start with, or was it like a building process where you just had to take the next step and then God showed you another door or another opportunity? What was that like?
I think it's a combination of those things.
Yeah, we went down very naively with our own plans. Some things, we were going to educate everybody, and everybody's going to get a college degree, and that was going to be the way out for all of the kids.
Right.
Not realizing that just not wasn't realistic.
Not everybody's college
material, and so then what do we do? So the trade school has come in, and just teaching them how to apply for a job, fill out an application, and actually work and manage money. Those are more realistic goals for some kids.
But on the other hand, I would say from the time we went down, God gripped our hearts in 2006 for this project. And even when we started the organization, the nonprofit in the States, God was already planting seeds in our heart that what's happening here is special. There's something special about what's happening. And this model can be used to impact the lives of more women and children. There are more places that this model could go. There are more women and children that can be helped through this. So God, even in 2010, when we were flying back from our trip, that's when we started talking about, we think we need to do something else. We think this needs to go global. So the reality is we have aspirations that we feel like James Project needs to multiply, and we feel like that it's called to multiply. But the reality is we have these big dreams, we have these big plans, but it is about the next step. We're not we're not going to force it. We feel like it's in God's timing, and it could be what Joanne and Carol did, we could never do. I can't imagine starting from nothing and creating what they created. It's incredible how God used them to do that.
Mhm.
But I also see the model of when you look at David and Solomon. David had this big plan to build the temple, and God said, "It's not you, it's Solomon, it's the next leader." So
Mhm.
we feel like that's where James Project's going. I believe that that vision is from the Lord. I believe that. I don't, I mean, I have not heard an audible voice that says, "Tiffany, this is what what you do." But I
Right.
believe in the Lord because I see God's hand. I see the impact it's made.
Mhm.
But I don't know if that's going to happen during our time
Mhm.
or if it's going to happen in time to come. I don't know. But I know that God has called us to serve the orphan and the widow, that he has called us to rescue the vulnerable and the hurting. And this world is full of hurting women and children.
Mhm.
And I know that what God created through the James Project is powerful. I know that he's at work there, that his spirit is changing lives, is changing families, is changing the direction. So I think it's a combination of did we come in with these big ideas? We did, but we hold them lightly.
Yeah.
And we're open to and it is a lot about you just take the next step and see what God has. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of things we take a step and then we realize, okay, we're supposed to be going this way or this way. But you just keep going and trusting a little more each day.
Yeah. Yeah, I read a book once. I think it's by Max Lucado, and he talks about there's a whole chapter on you can't move a parked car, you know. And so, like you said, sometimes you step out and you take a step, and then you turns out you needed to be in a different direction, so you pivot and go with, and that's the same type of thing you were talking about with your identity. When we hold so tightly to what we think, whether it's who we are or what we're supposed to do, it's really hard for him to move us in any different direction because we're holding so tightly to that. So I think that's really powerful to remember to just hold those things lightly
Yeah.
because you never know.
It's hard to do sometimes. Well, and it's humbling sometimes because what we've had to do, I mean, the reality is, have we misstepped? Absolutely.
Mhm.
We have. And when we do, we try to be very transparent about the fact that we have. We're not perfect, but we're trying and we're trying to do it with integrity and we're trying to do the best we can. It's not going to be we're not going to hit every ball out of the park. But
No.
we're just going to keep trying to do what's best for the kingdom of God and where we feel like he's leading us.
Yeah. And that was a very freeing realization for me when I was homeschooling because I was panicking about like I'm going to mess this up. I don't know what I'm doing. My plan is not working, so I'm really going to mess this up. And I remember reading somewhere one morning how he redeems our mistakes when our heart is right, and it was just so freeing to be like, "Oh yeah, I am going to mess this up." And that's okay. Because I'm going to mess it up because I'm trying to do the best I can. And that trying means I'm going to fail and it's okay because he can fix it. Do you know what I mean? He can bring something good out of it. He can redeem it. So it's just very freeing in that when we can put our trust in him a little more each day and try to go with that and follow his path for us. But um, so so what are some of your big dreams moving forward then? Obviously to take this global, but what breaking it down, like reverse engineering, what does that look like for the next year or the next 5 years?
Well, we have some land that has been donated for the
Mhm.
purpose of a new location in Guatemala. We are still waiting on the legal process to do its thing, but I feel like this year is going to be the year. This has been going on for a
It's a couple of years. Things
couple of
move
years into
slow
it.
in Guatemala,
Yeah. Guatemala time
but
is slower.
so we believe the replication is coming. We also believe that, something that's been on our hearts for several years is a lot of our redeemed women are squatting in someone else's property,
Oh, wow.
or they are living in areas very remote that could be dangerous for them and their children. Or, I mean, they're just put in risky situations. We have dreamed of buying a piece of land and having a widow's community where we can have a safe place for them where they could be stabilized. And we could start and work through the program, and eventually maybe they could transition out into their independence, or, but if we had a piece of land where they could be safe and um, start developing themselves and their families, that would be incredible to have. Obviously, we have more homes that we want to build on the property because we get calls all the time and we have to say no to a lot of them. This month, we're launching I say this month, I'm not sure when it'll be published, but in January, we're launching the transition home in the city. So having more opportunities for our kids to study and to find jobs and to become independent, another step towards independence is a
Because
huge part of what we're going to.
yeah. And the transition home is for kids that, just in case someone doesn't know, they're kids that have aged out of the
Right.
children's home,
Yeah.
but aren't ready to necessarily be on their own. Then they still want support, right? So 18 and
Right.
up. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And, and one of the biggest areas of opportunity I think we have is supporting the families, supporting vulnerable families that have not had their kids taken yet, but are vulnerable to that could lose their kids, or families where our children's bio families that they're probably going back to. So I think our family care program and that community program is we've got to expand that dramatically, because I think that's going to have a huge impact. It's going to have a huge impact on the lives of kids. A lot of the kids that come into care, we were having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday, and the numbers that people say, 140 million orphans around the world. A lot of those orphans aren't necessarily children without parents. They may be social orphans, put into home foster care, that type of thing. There's a good chunk of kids that their families aren't abusing them. They're not in bad situation. It's not that. They just don't have the resources to take care of them.
Right.
And so it's abandonment and neglect, which is devastating to a child, but it's because they don't have the resources to take care of them. It is so much healthier if we could get that family healthy and keep that child in that situation. And it's so much cheaper to do that. And the outcomes are so much better. So if we could expand that program, I think it would make a huge impact on Guatemala in general.
And you were talking about, I know you mentioned one time we were chatting about parenting school, right? That would be part of it, is kind of trying to help these parents learn how to take care of their kids, how to support them, how to raise them, right?
Yes, because a lot of our kids, the parents grew up the same way the kids did. They're only doing what they
know.
do or what they know. They haven't had the opportunity to know anything different.
Right.
So providing that parenting school and giving them the opportunity, and giving them through that parenting school interaction with our psychologists that can help them overcome some of their traumas. It can help them address some of the issues they're facing. It could have a huge impact on these families and the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Much wider range.
Generation.
Yeah. So how can someone who is interested, if they're listening to this, how can they support or come alongside and partner to make some of these dreams a reality? What are some ways that people can support you?
Well, there's lots of ways, lots of things they can sponsor or just give towards. Our website has many options on them. As far as, I would direct them to the jamesproject.org for that purpose. As far as bigger things, would you say that would be the best avenue?
I would also say everybody can pray. There's lots of ways to get involved. The first is everybody can pray. And the reality is prayer moves mountains. There's nothing more important than that. So if you're interested in James Project, if you think about these women and children, pray for them. Pray that God gives us wisdom. Pray that the resources are provided. Pray that salvations happen, that there's revival that just pours over James Project and out into the community. Because if that happens, if revival tears out over Monjas and over Guatemala, you're not going to see these abuse situations. You're not going to see it, because the power of God is going to change everything. So pray for them, pray for us, pray for our house parents, for our staff as they're going through it. That's the most important thing you can do. As Bryon said, you can support financially. You can give online, jamesproject.org. It tells you you can give online. It also tells you how to mail checks in. If you want to come see, if you've never come to see and you want to make sure, we encourage people before you get involved, come see, taste, feel that what we're doing is real. I mean, if you're going to get involved with someone, you need to know that it's legitimate, that the work being done is real. So we have missionary teams that come down, missions teams. Reach out to us. There's a way to reach out to us on the website and we can connect you. Or if you're looking for a short term, we take vision trips down 3 times a year where you can go on a short trip and you'll get a tour of the property. You'll interact with the kids. You'll see our women's programs. You'll interact and you'll see what God's doing in Guatemala and you'll see the need. So that's really what we need. You can step in and rescue a child, rescue a woman, rescue a family, rescue a community today. And you could do that through your donations and through your prayers. And you can come see to make sure that it's a legitimate organization.
Yeah. And to be honest, you talk about all that changes in the lives of the people that you serve, but the people that come down, I mean, my family's been drastically changed. You know what I mean? And I know so many people, I mean, the people I've taken down and people I've gone down with, it's a life-changing experience. So the ripple effect is not just, contained to Guatemala, which is such a beautiful thing, I think.
I agree.
I'd like to add on the vision trips there's only 3 per year, and they're very limited in the space and capability. So we would like to reserve those for people who are already in a leadership position of some sort, that they want to get their group, whatever that group is, involved, that maybe they would come
Right.
with purpose, rather than most people would probably just come on a regular team.
Yeah.
Does that make
Well,
sense? Right? Sure.
Yeah, either a leadership position or somebody who's looking to invest at a heavy level.
Yeah.
That's
right. So you have a use case for the vision trip. Yeah. But they can find more information about that too on the website if they're curious. So, all right. So, one of the things that I ask everybody, that I'm going to ask everybody, is there's this quote from our family that we really like. It's from Mother Teresa, and she says, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And the reality is we all have a purpose, whether we're living it out or not. God has prepared work for us to do in advance, it says in Ephesians, and that's our legacy. Like He has a legacy plan for each one of us. If we choose to seek it out, right? And I know that you would agree, when you're living out what you really feel like God has called you to do, whether it's international missionary work or, working at Shaw's, it doesn't matter. It all feels much more purposeful when you're living for something bigger than yourself and you're living in your legacy. So what kind of advice, and you guys are leaving a very powerful and living a very powerful legacy, which I'm very grateful for. But what kind of advice would you give someone who feels that similar tug on their heart to, that was not good English, but on their heart to serve God and with their lives, that pour out their lives for Him? What would you, whether it's through something big or small? I mean, I know when we talked before, Bryon, you said that the first half of your life, you didn't live for Him. So what made you decide to do this now? And what would you tell someone who was feeling the same way?
Obedience. If you're being called to it, you have to. It's that simple. If you don't, if you're not living in obedience, you're not living in God's will. And I sure don't want to be outside of His will. I don't think anybody else does either.
Yeah. And when you weren't, I mean, the first time we chatted, you talked about and got kind of emotional about the first half of your life wasn't for Him, right? And what's the difference in the two of those?
Frozen.
Did
cut
I
out? Kat.
Oh, you're back now.
Okay. So I was saying, when we had chatted before, you had gotten really emotional about the first half of your life not being lived for Him, and now, doing this. What's the biggest difference that you see, and why is it so emotional to think about, living for God?
I guess that it's going back to the joy of living in His will.
Yeah.
Uh, living for myself, I thought was great. I was doing what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and didn't care what anybody else thought. But and obviously, when I became a Christian, that changed. But when I became a missionary and we moved to Guatemala, it was the joy of just the living in the will of the Father.
Mhm.
He's proud.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how else to say that.
That's perfect. That's a beautiful way to say that. I hadn't thought of that. He is very proud of both of you, and it's amazing. And I'm very grateful for your obedience and willingness to take the next step and see what could be in the future, and let him show you those visions and walk them out, taking each next step. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I hope that you know how much people appreciate the work that you do. Not just this. I mean, I know, Tiffany, you had said that one of the things you didn't realize that you would appreciate so much was the staff, right? When you went down there, you knew you loved the kids, but loving the staff was surprising, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. They,
Not
it's
surprising.
funny.
They're very lovable. I don't mean that.
It's just I didn't. Yeah, I worked in the corporate world. I mean, you have coworkers, but it's different. And I know Joanne had said something similar before we transitioned down about how much she was going to miss the staff and how much she loved the staff. And I was like, yeah, we really love the kids. I mean, but oh my gosh, the staff, I miss them so much not being there. And in 2020, when I was back here and then the world shut down and I couldn't get down there and I couldn't see my friends and my family, because when you're down there, you're walking through those situations. And when you have those kids and your heart is broken over and over and over again as they come and they go, and you hear the stories and the people that you lock hands with and fight in those spiritual battles with, those relationships are strong. And those people are special. Those are people, I mean, when you've gone to battle with somebody at that level, that is a chain that's not easily broken. And our staff is full of some amazing, amazing people. I am blessed to get to work alongside all of them. They're they're spiritual warriors, but they're fun too. I mean, they're just fun and they're caring and they're great.
They love to have a good time.
They do.
They're a good time to be around.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever, just a side note, Tracy, when I went down to help, when Braden went down to film for you, and so it was just Braden and I down there for a few days, I was working in the office with Tracy. And one morning he'd gone with Rudy to the Redeemed Women, one of the women's homes, to take some video and pictures. And he left the office before I got to the office. So I was a little worried. I'm that kind of a mom. And so I said to Tracy, how long is he usually gone? Rudy, how long is, and she looked at me straight face, like didn't bat an eyelash. She's like, a couple of days. Of course I panic. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah. She's precious.
She is so amazing. I go down and she has so many times she leaves like a beautiful little note on my desk, welcome back. We love you. We missed you so much, of flowers, or they put something in my apartment to welcome me back with. And I mean, they're just so amazing. They're just amazing.
It is a beautiful thing to see. I mean, I don't get to work with them every day, but I get to be down there for a week at a time. And that's one of my favorite parts. I mean, I love the kids, of course, but to see the unity in a group of adults that are solely focused on taking care of those kids, it's just so beautiful. And I'm blessed by it every single time. So I'm grateful that it exists for all of us to enjoy and experience, and that we don't have pillows packed with packing peanuts.
And roosters fighting next door.
Right. So I'm not sure I ever let you answer that last question. I'm sorry. What kind of advice? You said obedience, Bryon. What would you say, Tiffany, about like if someone was feeling a desire to, if they're looking at their life and they're like, I've just been living for myself. It's super empty. I'm depressed. I'm sad. I know there's got to be more. What would you say?
I would kind of the same thing, say yes. And I mean, saying yes oftentimes is just getting your eyes off yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think often we're so focused on what I want, what do I want to do? What do I feel like I need to do? How do I feel led? How do I feel? But the reality is, God puts people in front of us and situations in front of us every single day in our lives, whether you're in the States, whether you're working at McDonald's, whether you're a nonprofit leader, whether you're a pastor. There's situations in front of us every single day that you can say yes to, that you can bring God into every situation that is in front of you, knowing that it's there for a reason. And if you keep your eyes on eternity and on saying yes in that situation, because this may be your last moment. Do you want to say yes in your last moment or not? I mean, I think that's the difference. You can serve him anywhere you are, but you have to open your eyes and see the needs that are out there. I think too often we're so focused on what makes me happy, what am I doing, and I think that leads to just depression and narcissism. But I think you need to be focused on, okay, what is out there? What's God bringing to me today? How do I say yes in this situation?
Yeah. Yeah. And that inward focus really is not, you can't ever sustain it because you can't control the circumstances around you. So if it's all based on how you feel and life around you doesn't match up with that, what do you do with that? Right. So you have to, it's so much more successful to look outside yourself and really try to pour into somebody that you come across, even if it's something small. So I agree.
And how do you use the current situation for his glory, whatever it happens to be? When I was little, from the time I was little, I didn't, we went to church when we were little, but I had no idea what a missionary was. But from the time I was little, I thought I wanted to go to the Peace Corps because I always had this desire to help internationally and work with the poor, work something, I mean, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what it looked like. But as I grew up, I also knew I wanted a master's degree.
Mhm.
And nobody, since I wasn't in the church world, I didn't know what that looked like. I ended up getting a business degree and then an MBA. And the whole time, and before, I'm like, why do I have this? This isn't my passion. I'm not super crazy about business, but just continuing to say yes. And I didn't do great all the time. I wallowed a lot of times because I'm like, why aren't I doing what I want? But looking back, realizing how much God used every one of those steps to get us where we are today. Because now, where we are today, I'm using that business degree and I'm using it in exactly the way, those dreams that He planted in my heart years ago. He's combined those. So trusting that He knew better than I did and maximizing each step of the way, knowing that somehow He's weaving everything together to paint this perfect picture. But you have to say yes and keep taking that step of obedience forward.
Even if you don't know what the step after it is, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. That is very powerful. And I hope people are inspired to think outside of themselves and either get involved with the James Project because it is an amazing project to get involved with, and or find someone in their neighborhood that they can pour into or do something nice for. So I hope that you do know how very amazing you both are and how proud God is of you and how grateful I am to know you and my family. And I know how grateful so many other people are that you are taking the steps of obedience every single day and continuing to press forward, even when it's hard, even when it's, the challenges or seem overwhelming, that you just keep taking the next step. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you,
Thank you,
Kathy. We
Kathy.
appreciate you more than you know too.
Yeah.